I was sitting in the waiting room of Street Mercy General when a nurse I'd never seen before crouched down beside my chair and pressed a small white envelope into my palm. "Don't open this until you're home," she whispered. "And don't let your son see it." Before I could say a word, she was gone. Back through those double doors, back into the hospital that had swallowed my wife 8 months ago and never given her back. My son Raymond was across the room, talking on his phone, turned away from me. He hadn't seen a thing. I slid the envelope into my jacket pocket and sat very still, the way you learn to sit when the world keeps knocking you sideways and you're not sure which hit is going to be the one that finally takes you down. I'm grateful you're here with me today. Before I tell you what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Drop a comment below. This old man's story is better with company. 8 months earlier, my wife of 41 years had died in the house we built together. The official story was simple. Eleanor fell down the stairs in the early morning. Alone. I was in Dallas visiting my brother Frank, a trip Eleanor herself had encouraged. By the time Raymond called me, she was already gone. Blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with a fall. The medical examiner ruled it accidental. Case closed. I flew home to an empty house and a grief I didn't have words for. Eleanor had been the kind of woman who remembered the birthday of every person she'd ever met. She grew tomatoes in the backyard and gave them away to the neighbors. She taught 3rd grade for 30 years in Claremont, Ohio, and half the town had been in her classroom at some point. She was careful, she was steady. She did not fall downstairs. But I was 67 years old and hollowed out with loss, and when the people in authority tell you something was an accident, it takes a certain kind of strength to say otherwise. I didn't have that strength then. I told myself I believed them. What I actually did was go through the motions. I accepted the casseroles. I sat through the memorial service. I watched Raymond deliver a eulogy that made the whole church cry. And I noticed, somewhere beneath my grief, that he cried on cue, at all the right moments, and his eyes stayed dry. I pushed that thought down deep and tried to forget it was ever there. The reason I was back at Street Mercy that afternoon was paperwork. 8 months of paperwork, because Eleanor had been enrolled in a hospital wellness program, and there were forms to sign to officially close the account, and the hospital had sent 3 letters before I finally made myself go. Raymond had insisted on coming with me. He was helpful that way lately, showing up unannounced at the house, offering to handle things, asking, gently but persistently, whether I'd given any more thought to selling. The house had been appraised at $480,000. Raymond had a buyer ready, a developer who wanted to tear it down and build condominiums. "Dad, it's just a house," he'd told me the week before. "You're rattling around in there alone. It's not healthy. Mom wouldn't want you living like this." There it was. The mention of Eleanor, deployed like a tool. "I'll think about it," I'd told him. The same thing I'd been saying for 3 months. So we were at the hospital together, Raymond charming the woman at the front desk while I sat with a clipboard of forms on my lap, and a nurse I had never seen before knelt beside me and changed everything. The drive home took 40 minutes. Raymond talked the whole way, about the developer, about a senior living community he'd toured, about how much easier my life could be. I made sounds of acknowledgement and kept my right hand pressed flat against my jacket pocket, feeling the shape of the envelope underneath. He walked me to the door. "You sure you're okay, Dad? You seem quiet." "I'm tired," I said. "Long day." He squeezed my shoulder and left. I watched his car back out of the driveway and disappear around the corner. Then I went inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and took out the envelope. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a small USB drive. I unfolded the paper first. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, like someone who'd thought carefully about each word before writing it. "Mr. Holt, my name is Diana Reyes. I was Eleanor's floor nurse during her final hours. There are things about that night that were never reported. What's on this drive is what I recorded. I couldn't come forward before. I'm sorry it took me this long. Please give this only to someone you trust completely, not local police." I read it 3 times. Then I sat there for a long while and looked at the kitchen where Eleanor used to make coffee every morning at 6:15 without an alarm, because she'd done it so long her body just knew. The USB drive sat on the table in front of me like a small explosive device. I didn't own a laptop. Eleanor had used one for her lesson plans, And after she died, I'd left it on her desk in the spare room, exactly where it was. The way you leave certain things untouched because touching them feels like the last step of something you're not ready to finish. I opened it that night for the first time since the funeral. It took me 20 minutes to figure out how to access the drive. My grandson Marcus had tried to teach me once. I wished I'd paid more attention. When the files finally opened, there were 3 of them. 2 video files and 1 audio recording. I started with the audio. It was a conversation. 2 voices, recorded in what sounded like a hospital corridor, slightly muffled but clear enough. One voice I recognized immediately, Dr. Philip Carnett. He had been Eleanor's physician during the brief window between her arrival at the hospital and her death. A compact man with careful eyes, who had sat across from me in a consultation room and explained, with practiced sympathy, that the injuries were consistent with a fall and that there was nothing more they could have done. The other voice I didn't recognize at first. It took me almost a full minute of listening before the cadence settled into place, because I had never heard my son speak in that register before. Flat, businesslike, stripped of the warmth he performed so well for everyone else. "Is it clean?" Raymond's voice. "As far as the report goes, yes. Accidental. But if anyone looks at the talk screen carefully, no one's going to look. She's 63. She fell, that's what the paperwork says." A pause. "The arrangement we discussed," Dr. Carnett said. "Transferred this morning. The account in Clearwater." Another pause. Then Carnett again. "This is the last time. I mean it." "Agreed," Raymond said, and his voice had the easy confidence of a man who was already thinking about something else. The recording ended. I sat in Eleanor's chair at her desk, in the dark, and I did not move for a very long time. I thought about the trip to Dallas, the trip Eleanor had encouraged. "You should go, Walter. You haven't seen Frank in 2 years. I'll be perfectly fine for 3 days." I had assumed she wanted time to herself. She was like that sometimes, quietly self-sufficient. It had never occurred to me that she might be sending me away to keep me safe. I opened the first video file. It was security camera footage, grainy and time-stamped, shot from a high angle in what appeared to be a hospital corridor. The timestamp read 4:47 a.m. I could make out 2 figures moving quickly toward an exit. One of them was wearing a white coat. The other was Raymond. Raymond had told me he'd arrived at the hospital at 7 in the morning, after the nursing staff called him. He had told me he was as blindsided as I was. The second video was shorter. A close-up, filmed on what looked like a phone camera, unsteady and rushed. It showed Eleanor's medical chart, and at the bottom, in the section for attending physician notes, there was a single line that had been crossed out and rewritten, the kind of correction that might have looked like a clerical error if you weren't looking for it. I was looking for it now. The original notation had read, "Elevated sedative levels, inconsistent with patient history." That line had been crossed out. Over it, in different ink, all levels within normal parameters. Eleanor hadn't fallen. She'd been sedated first. I closed the laptop and went to the bathroom and was sick. Then I ran cold water over my face and gripped the edge of the sink and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. 67 years old, retired high school history teacher, widower. My son had killed my wife. I thought about calling the police. The note had said not to. Not local police. I thought about what Raymond had said in that recording. She fell. That's what the paperwork says. He'd said it with the confidence of someone who knew the paperwork would hold, which meant he knew the people who would investigate it, which meant Diana Reyes had been right to warn me. I needed to think, and I needed to think without anyone knowing I was thinking. I called my brother Frank in Dallas and asked if I could come visit. "Of course," Frank said, without hesitation. He had always been steady that way. "Come tomorrow if you want." "Don't tell Raymond," I said. A pause on the other end. "Walter, what's going on?" "I'll explain when I get there. Just please don't mention it to him if he calls." I booked a bus ticket that night, paid cash at the station the next morning, and told no one where I was going. Frank's house in Dallas was a small ranch style on a quiet street. He met me at the door, took one look at my face, and poured us both a glass of bourbon without asking. I sat at his kitchen table and told him everything. Frank was 2 years younger than me and had spent 20 years as a claims investigator for an insurance company before he retired. He had a methodical mind and a deep suspicion of anyone who stood to benefit financially from someone else's death. When I finished talking, He set down his glass and was quiet for a moment. "The nurse," he said. "You trust her?" "I don't know her. But she had nothing to gain from lying. She had something to gain from waiting 8 months. She was scared," I said. "She said as much in the note. She works at that hospital. If she accused a physician of falsifying records and no one believed her, she'd lose everything." Frank nodded slowly. "What do you want to do?" "I want to make sure it can't be buried again," I said. "And then I want justice for Eleanor." Frank knew a woman. He'd worked with her years ago, a federal investigator named Carolyn Marsh, who now consulted for a white-collar crime division. She was thorough and she was honest, and she operated outside the local system. He called her that evening. She called back within the hour. "Send me the files," she said. "All of them. Tonight." I watched Frank scan the USB contents and send them by encrypted email to an address Carolyn provided. Then I sat back in the chair and felt, for the first time in 8 months, like something was moving in the right direction. It was almost midnight when my phone rang. "Raymond." I let it ring. He called again 5 minutes later. Then he sent a text. "Dad, where are you? Went by the house. Your car's there, but you're not." Getting worried. I put the phone face down and went to sleep in Frank's guest room. I hadn't slept more than 3 hours at a stretch since Eleanor died. That night, I slept for 7. Carolyn Marsh drove up from Austin the next day. She was in her late 50s, close-cropped gray hair, the kind of calm that comes from having seen a great deal and chosen, deliberately, not to be shaken by it. She sat at Frank's kitchen table and went through everything with a focus that reminded me of the way Eleanor used to grade papers, thorough, unhurried, missing nothing. "The audio recording alone is problematic," she said. "Chain of custody issues. We'd need the nurse to testify. She took a risk getting this to me, and we need to give her a reason to take another one." Carolyn looked up. "The financial transfer your son mentioned. Do you have any access to bank records? Joint accounts? Anything?" Eleanor and I had shared a checking account. After she died, I'd transferred the balance to my own account and barely touched it. But we had also held a joint savings account, and I still had access to the records. I hadn't looked at them since the funeral. I looked at them now. Between January and March of that year, 6 months before Eleanor died, there had been 3 transfers out of the savings account, $10,000 each. All 3 marked with a memo I'd never entered, property consultation fee. I had never consulted anyone about the property. Eleanor had noticed. Among the files Frank pulled from the USB, there was one I hadn't opened yet, a document file, buried in a subfolder, labeled simply WH, my initials, Walter Holt. Inside was a letter. Eleanor's voice came off the page so clearly that I had to stop reading twice before I could finish it. "My love, if you're reading this, then Diana found her courage, and you found yours. I'm so proud of you both. For the last year I've been watching money disappear from our account. Raymond denied it when I asked. Said it was an investment, that I wouldn't understand, that I was imagining things. I started keeping records. I hired a private accountant. The money was going to Philip Carnett, the Dr. Raymond plays golf with, the one he introduced us to last spring. I don't know exactly what they're planning, but I know Raymond has been talking to a developer about the house. And I know that Carnett changed the dosage on my blood pressure medication without telling me 3 weeks ago, and when I asked the pharmacy about it, the original prescription was gone from the system. I've been careful. I've documented everything I can. I've given a copy to Diana for safekeeping because I trust her and I don't trust this computer not to be accessed. I want you to live in that house for as long as you want to, Walter. It's yours. We built it. Don't let anyone take it from you. If I'm wrong about all of this, we'll laugh about it someday over coffee. And if I'm not wrong, then know that I loved you every day of 41 years. Not one day wasted. Not one. Eleanor. I folded the letter and held it against my chest for a long moment. There in Frank's kitchen, while the afternoon light came in through the window and lay across the table where Eleanor's words had just rearranged everything I thought I knew about the last year of her life. She had known. She had been afraid. She had protected me the only way she could, by sending me to Dallas, by giving the evidence to Diana, by writing me a letter she hoped I would never need to read. And I hadn't seen it. I had been right there beside her, and I hadn't seen any of it. Carolyn put her hand briefly over mine. "She was protecting you," she said. "That's not the same as you failing her." I took a breath. "What happens now?" "Now," she said. We build the case so airtight that no one can touch it. And then we move. Carolyn needed 10 days. 10 days to verify the financial records, to locate the account in Clearwater that Raymond had referenced on the recording, to work with federal contacts and establish jurisdiction that bypassed the local system Raymond appeared to have in his pocket. 10 days of calling Raymond back and listening to his voice and saying I was fine, just visiting Frank, just taking some time. 10 days of hearing him gently push the sale of the house and saying I was thinking about it. He drove up to Dallas on day 6, said he was worried, sat in Frank's living room and talked about grief and moving forward and Eleanor's wishes, and I looked at him across the coffee table and thought about every birthday he'd ever had in that house, every Christmas morning, every scraped knee I'd cleaned up and every nightmare I'd talked him down from, and I tried to reconcile all of that with the voice on that recording. I couldn't, but I sat with the impossibility of it, and I kept my face neutral, and I told him again that I was thinking about the house. He hugged me before he left, long and firm, the way a son hugs a father. I stood on Frank's porch and watched his car go, and I didn't go back inside until it was completely out of sight. Diana Reyes agreed to testify. Carolyn had reached out through intermediaries, carefully, giving Diana time to make the decision herself. She called me the evening before everything happened, and I didn't recognize the number, so I almost didn't answer. "Mr. Holt," she said, "I just wanted you to know. I should have done this sooner. I've told myself 100 times that I was protecting my family, my job, my daughter's college fund. All of that was true. But Eleanor deserved better than what I gave her. I'm sorry. You gave her a chance at justice," I said. "She would have understood the rest." A long pause. "Then she talked about you, while she was still conscious. She kept asking if you were safe. That was the word she kept using. Safe. I couldn't speak for a moment. She loved you very much, Mr. Holt." "I know," I said. "I know she did. The morning Carolyn moved, she moved fast. Raymond was at his office in Columbus when federal agents arrived. Carnett was in the middle of morning rounds at Street Mercy. The account in Clearwater was frozen before either of them knew what was happening. I was at Frank's house, sitting at the kitchen table, when Carolyn called. "It's done," she said. "They're in custody." I looked out the window at Frank's backyard. A bird was making noise somewhere in the trees. "Thank you," I said. "Your wife did most of the work," Carolyn said. "We just finished what she started." The trial took 9 months. Raymond's attorney was expensive and aggressive, and it didn't matter. The financial records, the security footage, the audio recording, Diana's testimony, Eleanor's letter, the altered medication records, reconstructed by a forensic pharmacist it was, as Carolyn had promised, airtight. Raymond received 22 years. Dr. Carnett received 16. 2 others, associates who had helped move money and access the hospital system, received lesser sentences. No one walked away. I went to every day of the trial. I sat in the gallery and watched, because Eleanor had spent a year building this case, and she deserved to have someone present for the end of it. Raymond looked at me once, on the last day, as they let him out. I held his gaze, and I did not look away. I don't know what I wanted him to see. Maybe just that I was still standing. That Eleanor's love had been stronger than whatever it was he'd become. I went home to Claremont after the verdict. The house was exactly as I'd left it. Eleanor's tomatoes had died over the winter, but the plants were still there in their beds, dried stalks waiting to be cleared. I left them for now. The kitchen smelled faintly of the lavender she'd kept in a small jar above the sink. I'd replaced that jar 3 times in the past year, buying the same brand she always bought. Not entirely sure why. I knew why. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. Carolyn had connected me with an attorney who helped me recover the money Raymond had transferred. Not all of it, but enough. The house was mine, free of any legal ambiguity. There was a developer who still wanted to buy it. I called him back and told him it wasn't for sale. Diana Reyes had lost her job at Street Mercy during the investigation administrative leave that became something harder to come back from. I hired her as my private care coordinator, a position I invented because I needed someone trustworthy, and she needed a soft landing. She drove me to appointments and helped me sort Eleanor's medical files. We didn't talk about that night often. We didn't need to. My neighbor Carol had kept an eye on the house while I was away. Her husband had passed 2 years before Eleanor. We started having coffee on Tuesday mornings, just to break up the quiet. It helped more than I expected. I planted the tomatoes again in April. Different variety than Eleanor had used, but something about kneeling in the same dirt, following the same rows she had laid out, made the work feel like a conversation. Like she was still instructing me in the things she knew, and I was still, slowly, learning. Some mornings I stood in the kitchen while the coffee brewed and talked to her, not expecting an answer, just maintaining a habit that felt too important to break. I volunteer now, 2 mornings a week, at the senior center 2 miles from the house. I help with a reading group. The books are sometimes things I would never have chosen on my own, and sometimes they're remarkable, and the conversations are always worth the drive. Eleanor would have been good at it. She always knew how to sit with people and make them feel heard. I'm learning. There are things I carry that I will carry for the rest of my life. The guilt of not seeing what was right in front of me. The image of Eleanor, alone in that house, afraid and careful and brave, making plans to protect a man who was in Dallas not knowing she needed protecting. That one lives behind my sternum in a particular way that I've stopped trying to reason away. But Eleanor left me a letter that said, "Not one day wasted," and I believe she meant it as instruction, not just description. I stood at her grave last week, a warm morning in September. Ohio light coming in low across the cemetery. I'd brought tomatoes from the garden, which seemed right to me even if it wouldn't make sense to anyone else. "I found it," I told her. "All of it. You did good, Ellie." The leaves moved. I don't know what that means, and I don't need to know. What I know is that she loved me with everything she had, right up until the moment she couldn't anymore. And that kind of love deserves to be lived up to. So I'm trying. Every day. I'm trying. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't have understood standing in that hospital waiting room 8 months into grief. A nurse pressing an envelope into my palm. The truth doesn't disappear just because it's inconvenient for powerful people. It waits. It finds a way. Sometimes it needs help, a brave woman who was frightened for a long time but wasn't frightened forever. A brother who poured bourbon and asked the right questions. A federal investigator who cared more about getting it right than getting it done fast. And sometimes the person you lost is the one who laid the whole path out in front of you, piece by piece, because they knew you better than you knew yourself. Eleanor knew I would find my way to that USB drive eventually. She knew I'd sit in a kitchen somewhere and read her letter and understand. She knew I was slow and stubborn and that I loved her enough to fight when I finally understood what needed fighting. She was right about all of it. She usually was. If this story reached you in some way, if it reminded you of something you're carrying or someone you've loved, I hope you'll share it with someone else who might need to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel. I've got more stories to tell, and I'd like you here for them. God bless you. And wherever you're watching from, you're not alone.